Okay, folks. Well, thanks very much for coming along to this afternoon's talk. So I'm Darwin Peltan. It's not working. Fail. Hey. So I'm Darwin from Pilotworks. First in-person talk for about 20 odd months, so a little bit nervous. Hats off to all the speakers who've done it before. So Pilotworks, we're a product consultancy based in Bristol, and we work with organisations like these, and we help the teams and the organisations to apply product discovery techniques. And what that means is that allows them to build better products and services for their users and deliver better outcomes for their stakeholders. So there's quite a wide range of organisations, a lot of them in the public sector, but also quite a few in the private sector as well. So we were established about 5 years ago, and our big focus is on product discovery. And in this talk today, what I'm going to do is explain a bit about what product discovery is and why it's important, and then give you some practical hacks to help you do better product discovery yourselves. Probably going to talk for about 20, 25 minutes and allow lots of time for questions at the end. So do fire questions at me and feel free to ask questions as we go along as well. I don't mind. Cool. So what do we mean by product discovery? It's one of those kind of nebulous terms, gets thrown around a lot, but it's probably not that well defined and people aren't that clear on what it means. So if I say product discovery to people in this room, what does that mean to you? Just shout out anything that comes to mind. What kind of things might you do when you're trying to do a product discovery?
Research.
Yep.
Ideation.
Yep.
Interviews.
Interviews, yep.
Prototype.
Sometimes, yep. Anything else? Those are the main kinds of activities that we're doing. And really it's about sort of, you've got two parts to building good products. Discovery, sort of deciding what to build, and delivery, building it. The bit on the left is kind of building the right thing, and the bit on the right is about building the thing right. And we need both of those to be done really well to create a successful digital product. And as members of product teams, we're all involved in both sides of this coin. Now, the thing that I've observed is that a lot of teams spend all their time focusing on the bit on the right. How can we optimize our delivery cycle? How can we ship stuff faster? How can we get stuff out there? How can we use, continuous deployment? All those things. There's a whole industry around that. But there's very little focus on actually building the right thing. What that means is that there's teams who are optimizing for delivering something that's completely not needed. So that's not working well. So wouldn't be an Agile talk without a quote from Peter Drucker. So as Peter said, nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency that which should not be done at all. No comment about the Millennium Dome on the left. And we know that this happens all the time, right? 7 out of 10 new products fail to meet profitability expectations. So many of the things we set out to build don't deliver the outcomes that we and our stakeholders were aiming to achieve. There's so many things that fail. There's actually museums of failed products. You can go to this museum, it's in America, and there's literally shelves and shelves of failed products. Now, they're not all digital products, because that would be a pretty weird museum, but there's so many things that have been launched. Who remembers this thing? Probably all too young to remember that. That failed. The Trump board game probably got a bit of a niche hit now, but failed at the time. But it's not just Nokia and Trump board game makers who fail at this. Even the big players do it. Google. Anyone remember Google Buzz or Google Wave? Google Wave wasn't a total failure because they took the code from that and they turned that into Google Docs. But as a product, it failed. And Ping from Apple, which I can't even remember what that was, but just faded into obscurity. So it happens all the time, right? And it's really wasteful. And it's really disheartening for the teams that are involved. And I'm not here to lecture and say, I'm perfect. I've been in this situation myself. So, little story. About 7 years ago, I was asked to join a large heritage charity to kind of manage the redevelopment of their mobile app. Now, when I joined, the business case had been approved, the budget had been approved, and the head of digital, who was an interim person, was under a lot of pressure to deliver something and show the value that he was bringing to the organisation. So I rocked up and was like, great, let's do a discovery, find out what our users need, then we can do a really great job with this mobile app. He was like, no, we've just got to deliver. I need to get something out by date X, which was basically the end of his contract. Anyone been in that sort of situation? Sound familiar? Yeah, we've all been there, right? So we set about trying to do the app. But the thing is, we were missing these 3 key ingredients. We didn't have that clear understanding of our users and what they needed from a mobile app. We didn't know about the technical dependencies and the constraints, how we're going to get data into the app, how we're going to push data back to other systems at the organization. And we didn't have that alignment around the business goals and the benefits for the new app. It was all kind of a bit hand-wavy, it'll be a better experience for users, but without any real concrete objectives or outcomes that we were looking for. And the result of that, so none of those things existed. So instead, we made a bunch of assumptions about what people needed, about how we'd get data into the out of the organization and back in again, and about what the outcomes and the goals were. And that meant it was really hard to prioritize, and the app took longer, and it wasn't as good as it should have been. I was pretty pleased with the product we created in those conditions, but it could have been a lot better if we'd just taken a little bit of time to do a bit of upfront discovery work. So in this talk, I'm talking about kind of upfront discovery. So, perhaps a short period of 6 to 8 weeks that you do when you're about to start a new initiative. There's other types of discovery. You may have heard of like continuous discovery, which is what you're doing as you're continuing to develop an existing product or feature. But this talk is really focused on kind of upfront discovery. Both are important, but that's the focus for this. So that experience, it's really disheartening. I worked on that product for about a year. We worked really hard, put our heart and soul into it, but the reaction from users was a bit meh. And I vowed at that point never to do that again. It wasn't the first time it happened to me, and I just really wanted to end up making things that people want. So that was the impetus to starting Pilotworks. So when I talk about discovery, I'm talking about all these things on the left. We're trying to understand the problem space. So what are the constraints? What are the org goals? What are the user needs? What are the dependencies? And it's by combining all of those things into a shared understanding amongst your product trio there. So in your discovery team, you need somebody who represents technology, somebody who represents the users, and somebody who represents the business and product. And by everyone coming together with that shared understanding, then you can identify and prioritize opportunities and turn those into solutions that you can test. Any questions on that so far? Cool. So we've spoken a bit about what discovery is and why it's important. Now we're going to talk about some of the kind of hacks that can help you apply it to your own organization, your own team. And I'm going to frame each of these in the kind of context of the challenges that I often hear from teams when they're trying to do discovery. So the classic one, our stakeholders think discovery will slow down delivery. Anyone heard this one before? This is the one that always comes up. Okay, so has anyone heard of Marty Kagan? Marty Kagan's been working in tech for about 35 years. He was like the lead product manager for eBay when they were starting out. He's written some great books. I really recommend this book, Inspired. So it doesn't really matter how good your engineering team is if you're not giving them something worthwhile to build. And this is really key. A really well-honed, agile delivery team, a bit like a tunnel boring machine. But if that tunnel boring machine isn't going in the right way and isn't going to deliver value, all you're doing is shipping waste behind you. So there's no point. So how do you actually create the space to do discovery? So the first thing is, it's never going to work. You need to change the conversation. Don't talk about discovery. Don't talk about the activities that you're going to do in discovery. Talk about something, use some language that's more palatable, research, R&D, learning. Talk about the kind of risks of not doing discovery. What's the cost of having an engineering team working for 6 months or a year on the wrong thing compared to spending 3 people spending 6 weeks figuring out if this is a problem worth solving. See if you can really be explicit about the kind of opportunity. So what's the driver for doing this discovery? Are you failing compared to competition? Are your users saying bad things about you online? Are your staff suffering? Are people leaving because the experience is so bad? Really focus the stakeholders on why you need to do this and why this is a problem worth solving and why there should be some upfront effort. The other thing is be bold. Tell people that you're going to do a discovery. If you have a builder and you ask them to build an extension and they say, oh, well, before we do the walls and the windows, the first thing we need to do is a foundation, you don't question them, they're the expert. We are the experts in building digital products. So we should tell our stakeholders what we intend to do, not ask for permission. Before I had this as, ask for permission, ask for forgiveness, not permission. But that's actually not quite so good because If you don't radiate your intent and you don't tell other people, then you could get fired. So that's quite a privileged thing to say. We all work in tech. We can probably find other jobs, but it's not that easy for everybody. So that's a bit irresponsible to ask for forgiveness. But also, if you radiate intent, that guarantees engagement. Whether people agree with what you want to do or not, it gives them a chance to intervene. They can offer support, they can offer challenge, but they may have information that's useful to you. So just broadcast your intent. And then people can intervene if they really think you shouldn't do it, or perhaps there was a previous project that did a discovery in this space. But be bold. Also, start small. You don't have to necessarily start with a commitment to a 6-week discovery. What's the smallest thing you could do to learn your most important question that you have? Do that. Prove the value. What have you been able to rule in or out? What risk have you been able to reduce by that? Use that to build trust and create more space to do more discovery work. The other thing that often happens is that people think, oh, you're just going to start from scratch. You're going to kind of reinvent the wheel. We've done loads of research in this space, or we've got loads of people in customer service who know what people need. So show that you're actually going to make use of that knowledge that's in the organisation already. You're going to engage with the people in customer services or in sales, or wherever that knowledge lies, or existing research. You're going to raid the bookshelves and build on that. You're not going to start from scratch. The other one we get all the time is we're not sure where to start. So you've been given the space to do some discovery, but you're working in a massive problem space or completely new space, so you don't really know where you should start. It's too big a problem. So what should you do? First thing is you start with inception. We're all Agilists, we know kind of what inception workshops are, but there's some key activities that are really important for discovery. First one I'd always recommend is an exercise called Hopes and Fears. I don't know if people have done this before, but you create that safe space and you get everyone to write down what they hope to get out of the discovery. That can be both what they want to learn, but also what they want to learn as a skill or develop. So perhaps somebody wants to have a chance to practice running user interviews, or somebody else wants to practice some kind of technical investigation. Get those things out there. This is a really great opportunity for people to learn and develop skills themselves, but also make it okay to talk about your fears. That really builds trust. So, and this is between the team and also the stakeholders. So perhaps the stakeholders have said yes to a discovery, but really they're worried. You can reinvent the wheel. So can you get them on board and get those fears off their chest and explicit, and then you can talk about what you're going to do to address those fears. The other thing I'd recommend is to really frame the problem and identify that existing knowledge. So there's some great problem framing questions, which I'll share afterwards, that help to, you just pin each of them up on the wall, each one on a sort of A3 sheet or in a Miro in the new world we're in now. And you get everybody to just write down everything they know under each of those things, so like who are the users, what tech do we have to integrate with, what's our route to market, all the kind of key questions that you need to understand. And people may have existing knowledge. And the interesting thing is it throws up loads of conversations. One person may think the users are X, another person thinks Y, and then you have a discussion about why there's a difference and what you're going to do to find out what's actually true. You also really need to map your key assumptions and prioritize them, because that's going to be the core of what you're working on during discovery. I'll talk a bit more about that. And you need to make a rough plan. So we're Agile, we don't want like a Gantt chart, but just a really loose, rough plan of how you're going to make the best use of that 6 or 8 weeks or however long you've got. So the other thing you need to do is have a clear discovery goal. So it's very easy to go into discovery with something that's quite vague. It's just about exploring problem space X, Y, or Z, but no clear outcome for what you want to get at the end of discovery. Discovery is about making a decision. So if you frame your goal in that term, then it will be much easier to know whether you've succeeded and align around what you need to do. Okay, on to assumption mapping. So, obviously, in discovery, we're really trying to prove out 3 main key types of risk. There's actually more than this, but everyone knows a Venn diagram looks better with 3 things. So, there you go. And these are the classic 3. Does anybody want it? Can we do this? Is it technically feasible? And is it viable? Should we do this? So as a team, you need to come together and map out your key assumptions under each of these 3 things. And the way you do that is you have a workshop and you write down your top 5 to 7 assumptions under each of those categories in the format of we believe that and then whatever your assumption is. And then you can use something like the business model canvas as a prompt to map the different types of risks that you've got. So feasibility on the left, desirability on the right, and then I've got should be viability at the bottom. Ignore that. And this really helps to think about where the different types of risk lie. There's other canvases you can use, like the Lean UX canvas or the Lean Startup canvas, but the principle's the same. It's all about the conversation that happens when you're doing this mapping together and what comes out of that. So you've got your key assumptions on here, and then the next thing you need to do is prioritize them. So everyone loves a 2x2. In this case, we're mapping things by how important that assumption is. So what's the impact if we're wrong? And how much do we know about that thing? Where do we have evidence and where do we have no evidence? So again, do this as a team, get all the different opinions out. So you get all your post-its onto there. And then the thing you really want to focus on, obviously, is the things that are in the top right, which isn't working. There you go. So those things up there, that's where you should focus your effort for your discovery, because they're the things that will really sink you if you're wrong there. If you want to learn more about assumption mapping, I really recommend watching this webinar by David J. Bland, which he did on the Mural blog, and there's various versions online too. Just search for assumption mapping, David Bland online or on YouTube, and he goes through the whole process. And there's actually a really great Mural frame that you can use for running that with your team. I only found about that in the last 12 months, and it's been absolutely a game changer. So I really recommend that. If you take nothing else away from this talk, do that. Okay. So the other thing that we hear a lot is that user research just takes too long. It's too hard, too slow. The problem is that winning products really come, as Marty says, the deep understanding of user needs combined with an equally deep understanding of what's just now possible. If you're going to create a great product, you need both of those things. So we really can't skimp on the kind of user research. If we do skimp, then the reaction's probably going to be something like this when you ship it. And that's not what we want, right? And there's people who are doing this, teams who are doing this. So this is Monzo. Their mission is making banking better for 1 billion people. And the way they started was identifying all the main pain points that customers encounter when dealing with their traditional banks and designing features to eliminate them. So we've probably all seen this feature. It's fairly kind of common now, but when Monzo did it, it was revolutionary, and they were the first. And that's just one example. You know, they simplified the whole onboarding process. You could sign up in the app without having to go to a bank and show them your ID. The whole thing, they just removed all of those pain points and made it simple for people. So how do we go about putting users first and at the heart of what we're going to do? First thing, again, is to start small. We don't have to commit to doing kind of 45 minutes, 1 hour depth interviews with our users. Just start with a simple conversation with people. Everyone can take 5 minutes out to talk to users, talk to a customer. You start there, grow out gradually. Obviously, if you can go straight to 45 minutes or an hour interview with people, you're going to find out a lot more. But start with the art of the possible. The other thing is to do it as a team. This is a poster from GDS, Government Digital Service. User research is a team sport. And they believe this so strongly that they actually mandate that developers have to spend a certain amount of time each 2-week sprint observing user research, because that is what creates that shared understanding of your users and your empathy for your users through the whole team. There's no point it just being in the heads of the user researcher or the product manager. Everyone needs to understand who the users are and what they need. It also means you can go a lot quicker. And you can, if you're just starting out with research, you can have one person running the session and then other people in the background observing, and then you can do a quick synthesis session afterwards, and you can also do a retrospective on the session itself. So give the person who's interviewing feedback. Did they interrupt too much? Did they ask leading questions? It's really easy to slip into that when you're starting out interviewing. So if you've got a team, keeps each other honest, and then you can rotate who's in the hot seat. Obviously, you can hire a user researcher, that's even better, but not every team has that luxury. And there's a lot you can do yourself. The other thing that's really important is about asking good questions. So don't ask any yes-no questions. Don't ask people if they like something. Don't ask them how they would approach a hypothetical purchase. If you ask somebody, how would you go about buying a new car? They're going to tell you an idealized story about all the kind of analytical trade-offs they would make and the decisions they'd go for, when actually we all know that a new car is a much more kind of emotional process than that. It's not as rational. People aren't rational. It's a whole behavioural economics thing about how people aren't rational. But when you put somebody in an interview situation and you ask them to describe some future scenario, they will present themselves. People want to be seen as rational and sensible, so they will tell you a story about what they would do, but it's basically nonsense, so you can't trust it. And again, don't ask people to tell you what they do in the future, if they're going to use your product, anything like that. Completely unreliable. If you do that, you're basically going to get this. Any line of duty fans? Instead, what you need to do is ask people to tell you about specific examples. So find people who've recently gone through the scenario that you're trying to model. So let's say it's hiring a rental car. Recruit people who've gone through that experience recently. Could be your existing customers, could be your competitors' customers, it doesn't matter. And ask them to tell you what that process was like. All the steps they went through, what was good, what was bad, and where they ended up. And ask them clarifying questions. So to get more detail, you said this bit was hard. What was hard about it? What did you do next? Who were you with? Where did you go? All those kind of things. And that will get you the detail you need. And sometimes you need to ask people to tell you, 2 or 3 examples, depending on the kind of scenario. Let's say it's rail tickets, something people do fairly frequently. You want to hear about a few different experiences to see if what they're telling you is consistent. People can lie once, but they can't lie consistently over time. And that way, you end up like this. Cool. So the other thing that comes up a lot is we're not sure what to do with the findings. So you've done all this great research. We've spoken a bit about the user research, but there's other research happening in parallel, into technical things, into policy, regulation, whatever the constraints are that you need to work within. You're all working away, you're finding out loads of things. What do you do with it all? The first thing you need to do is you need to make an evidence wall. Now, this was in the nice days when we could go into an office. Some things were definitely easier. You could stick it up on the wall as close as possible to your stakeholders. This is at Department for Education. Unfortunately, the closest wall we could get was in the basement, which wasn't ideal, but still better than nothing. We could bring the stakeholders to the wall and talk them through what we were finding out and get feedback and iterate and go from there. And we can huddle around it as a team. Now, we can't do that in the kind of current times, but you can replicate this kind of thing on Miro really easily. And it just means that you're bringing all the information out from people's individual notes, from different Google Docs, interview recordings, bringing all that insight out and putting it into one place where it's visible. And making all the goals really explicit as well. We're all Agilists. We know about the benefit of walls, right? I don't need to labour this point. But these are some of the things you could have on there. The other thing we recommend is that you share frequently. So it's not like you do your discovery and then you present your findings at the end. Just like any other Agile project, you should be doing regular show and tells. It could be informal, just getting people to come down and walk them through the wall of what you've heard, what you've learned, or it could be a proper show and tell. Typically, if it's a 6 to 8 week discovery, you probably need to do a couple of formal show and tells as well. And that gives a bit of a governance opportunity for your stakeholders. And just gives people who might be working in adjacent spaces early visibility of your findings. The other thing we recommend is to map journeys. So you try and make your findings as visual as possible for people to understand. So journey map, you've got the different tasks along the left, you've probably seen these before, the kind of activities that somebody's doing, and then their kind of mood as they're going through that process. So this is the kind of as-is journey map, and from that, we can visually see there's quite a lot of really big opportunities that we can make that experience easier for that user. And this is an example from USA.gov, but there's loads of them out there. You can also do this for what you're thinking of the future journey being and kind of compare and contrast. But again, it gives you something to have a discussion around. And the process of, again, any of these kind of mapping things, it's all about doing the map together. Not one person goes off and creates the map. It's all about the conversations that happen as you're creating it. The other kind of thing that we recommend for visualizing is opportunity mapping. Don't know why that's quite so blurry. So an opportunity map, you've got your business outcome at the top, and then from your interviews, you may have identified a few different opportunities, and then some possible solutions underneath them, and then some experiments to test those different solutions. I really recommend reading this blog post on Teresa's blog. Teresa Torres invented the opportunity solution tree, and she's got a great blog post explaining all about how to do it. And again, it gives you an easy way to visualize all the different opportunities And rather than what often happens where people are making decisions between different solutions, which are actually solving different problems, you actually want to be having a discussion about whether you should be focusing on opportunity A or opportunity B, and then comparing the solutions within them. So it stops people jumping ahead to, let's do feature A or feature B. Question? Yeah?
Do you often see multiple duplicated solutions for different opportunities? And would you then map those separately?
Sometimes, but if you're seeing the same solution under multiple opportunities, it's more often a sign that you need to slightly restructure your opportunities, because if you've mapped it right, they should be pretty unique. So, Drew's got a new book out, I think it's Continuous Discovery Habits, and she talks a bit more about the process of structuring your opportunity tree and then sort of iterating it. So it's something that evolves over time, and if you are seeing that repetition, it is a kind of symptom of your structure is not quite right. You're either not at the right level of detail or you haven't separated things quite right. Cool. The other kind of mapping that we recommend is story map. Probably heard of used story maps before, but this can be a really useful way to get a shared understanding of possible services that you could create based on what you've heard. And you can use this line here to prioritize what you're going to build first and what you're going to build later. You can have as many releases as you want. Obviously, don't plan loads of releases in the future because that's not very agile. But just what's your MVP? Is everything above the line? What are you going to do later below the line? Helps you identify what kind of capabilities you need to create. And also, you might identify particularly risky bits, whether it's maybe a dependency on some other tech that you need to do, or an assumption that a user is going to do a certain behavior or activity. Those are things you need to test next. So, and then you can do things like color in the story map as you start to deliver more of it. So use this as your kind of visual backlog. Much easier to see how much of your service you've created than a kind of traditional flat backlog. Again, I really recommend that book by Jeff Peltan, if you haven't got it already. Cool. So that's all the kind of the main hacks that I had. So just to kind of recap, when talking about getting buy-in, change the conversation, be bold, radiate your intent, start small, improve the value, and show your reuse stuff. When you're getting started, always run an inception, set a clear discovery goal, map your assumptions, and make a rough plan. When it comes to kind of doing research, start small, do it as a team, ask good questions, and then again, making evidence all, share what you're learning, map your journeys and opportunities, and story map those potential services. So there's quite a lot of different ideas kind of thrown into there, and it can be a bit of a journey. As Jeff says, be prepared for surprises and bad news. In fact, celebrate the bad news, because you could have received the same bad news months later after you'd built the software, and nobody wants that. That's it. Thank you very much. So I think we've got some time for a few questions, if anybody.
Well, sorry, Martin. I've used this a few times, well, actually several times, and I had many challenges, from little content to vague.
Yeah.
People work on a few kinds of levels, the user activities,
Mm-hmm.
tasks, stories. So I was wondering if you have some tips on how to actually run the session, facilitate the session.
Sure. Yeah. So I would always say start with the spine of your story map first. So what are the kind of equivalent to epics, or one layer up from epics? What are the main things that somebody's going to need to do in order to, so think about the end-to-end service that you're offering, and the goal that the user wants to complete is on the right. So working backwards, what are all the things that the user needs to do in order to complete that goal? Now, some of those things might be out of scope, but it's still worth showing them on your story map and just having a line to say, maybe this happens offline and it's not something that you're responsible for. So start with that spine and make sure everyone's happy that you've got the right things in that spine, and then do the next layer down after that is the main thing. Sometimes I think the confusion happens if it's a very broad service. You might need more than the sort of 2 or 3 layers that are traditionally there. So some people recommend doing very broad, shallow story map initially, and then breaking it out into a separate one on a kind of per epic or per feature basis. Because sometimes it can get really overwhelming quite quickly. There's so many, the detail of the different tasks.
Have you tried also doing like app?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes when we're
How does
like,
it work?
I think it works reasonably well if it's something that everyone's familiar with.
Alright.
But if it's a really big service, it can be a bit overwhelming. It kind of depends on the team, really. So sometimes we're doing like training, like we'll use that example that the AA folk used yesterday of getting ready to leave the house.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you start with that, and that one you do sort of bottom up, and then you categorise.
Thank you.
No worries. Ian?
Has remote working made a difference to story mapping and stuff? And do tools help, or do they hinder us against face-to-face?
Good question. So I think story mapping and things like that are definitely harder remote because the tools aren't that easy for everyone to use, and the conversation's not that easy to have through the tools. So a lot of the value in story mapping is, getting everyone in a room, generating that shared understanding, generating alignment and collaboration between people. And when you're doing that through an online tool, you can do it to an extent, maybe like 60, 70% as well as you could do it in a room, but it's still better in a room, I'd say. What is better is you don't then have to painfully type up all the post-its afterwards or wait for them all to fall down and then remember where they were. So that's better, but from the actual outcome, it's not quite as good remote. We're still evolving the tools, right?
I was going to say, using Zoom and tools like that for customer interviews has suddenly got a lot easier, however, because people are a lot more comfortable with, with that kind of approach, and it's a bit more like talking to them where they were than it used to be.
Yeah. So the user interviews, I'd say you can replicate more. It's the kind of team workshops that I'd say are harder. You still miss something with the Zoom interviews. So I did a lot of work with the Department for Education, and pre-pandemic, we'd go out and interview teachers in their schools, and you'd pick up loads of things just from the way the school was organised. Like one school we went to, every classroom had this really sort of regimented way of doing the notice boards, and it was clear that teachers were spending a huge amount of time just doing this way of doing notice boards, which wasn't really adding much value. But there's just little things that you pick up like that, or the nature of the dynamic in the corridors and the kids running around and stuff like that. You pick up a lot that you wouldn't get if you're doing it on Zoom, because you can just see what's in that square. But you can still learn enough to move forward and make progress. So, cool. Well, if anyone does have any other questions, I'm around all afternoon. I've got more stickers. I've also got some flyers. We're doing a kind of 2-day course about how to do discovery. It will be in real life, not on Zoom. And the flyers were actually made for March 2020, so ignore the dates, but climate emergency, there's no point throwing them away. So grab a flyer and new dates to be confirmed. But I'm around, so come and ask any questions. Happy to help.